Hi, I'm Mike Judge, and you're listening to the Pantheon Network.
Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 24 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, if you are just listening, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. If you are watching, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre. You can get the podcast on various streaming services, etc., etc. It's always the same story. It's pretty much everywhere. Just look up Music is Not a Genre or Nick DiMatteo, and you will find the alternate version of this. Let's get right into the topic this week. Music videos, do they matter? I put two question marks there, so let me try it again. Do they matter? A little like that. And that's the question. Really what I'm doing is a history and then asking that question. Why? And why that subtitle? Well, you know, music videos are everywhere. And whether we like it or not or love it or not, video in general is everywhere. So it's kind of an important part of the culture, really like never before, to be honest. And do they matter? It's a question that I think has been asked for decades, because music itself, of course, has existed long before any kind of that kind of visual. But visuals have always been an important part of music, even long before video has existed. So I think it's kind of a cool question to ask as we go through the history, and you may come to your own conclusion about that. Now, why am I doing this at all? I have had, I would say, kind of a love-hate or maybe indifferent relationship with music videos, primarily because I didn't really grow up with them the way a lot of people did. I was certainly exposed to music videos at a really early age and knew when MTV came on and all that stuff, but my parents didn't have cable. They didn't actually get cable, I think, until the very early 2000s. So that's like the prime years of MTV that, I mean, I got cable somewhere in between there, but I missed like the first decade of it than the way other people would have watched it, where it might have been on in the background, etc., etc. I saw it at friends' places, things like that. So I wasn't as absorbed with, you know, music video as other people my age and younger have been. So I don't think it made an indelible imprint on me the way it has for other people. And yet there are videos I love. I think visually. I already kind of see music visually. I use the DAW, the digital audio workstation, and looking at a waveform, I can tell at this point, you know, what it is or what part of it needs to be edited or all the various things that you need to know about a waveform when you are creating music. But I also have in my head, when I close my eyes, some type of a visual representation of music. It's not quite synesthesia, but it's kind of leaning in that direction. So to me, imposing another set of visuals on top of that music is almost distracting. It's almost like ADD, where you don't know where your focus should be. Now, that could be because the video itself is distracting and it's not as effective as it should be, but I think it's just me. And even the crappiest music videos can be fun to watch. And of course, the ones that are artistic and all, I'm kind of going to talk about a little bit later, which ones I prefer, if any. But that's why I'm doing this, is to really answer that question, not just for you, but for myself. Do music videos matter? I've made music videos and still don't know if they matter. So, you know, because I was a filmmaker at some point, and maybe again at some point I directed films. I've been in films and all of that. So I love photography, and my wife's a photographer. So I'm kind of surrounded by visuals. I love graphic design. And so this is just a big part of my life, as it is for everyone else's life. My sources for this episode are Wikipedia, of course, a report by MxTRA called A Brief History of Music Video. If you're out there, and I'm sure I mispronounced your name, come say hello to me. History.com, Vue.ai, Tulane Magazine, loudersound.com, rayfilm, R-E-Y film.com, and explain.ninja. Those are my sources. One disclaimer, this won't be a deep dive into MTV. That's been done. This is not an episode strictly about MTV. It actually goes long before that, and certainly after, if you can call it an after, and I think you can. So look elsewhere if you're looking for a deep history on MTV, although I will, of course, mention it because it's a big part of this. Format is going to be history broken into eras, and will include some notable and favorite videos, some conclusions, my videos, and featured song video, and then the bonus episode and questions, which, by the way, the bonus MxTRA video this week is on, wait for it, porn. Yes. And why? Because, and you'll see why, actually. I'll explain it a little bit later as we get into this history, but there's a way in which pornography and music collide when it comes to technology, and that's why that bonus MxTRA on patreon.com/musicisnotagenre is about porn and how it connects to music and to video, of course. And I love you there. As you may know, I have a limited time only $1 tier at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. I could really use your help because, as you may have heard a couple of weeks ago, this podcast may very well be ending at the end of this season. But if you are able to support me again with just $1 a month, that could change everything. So let's get right to it. History, although at this point you can't say right to it, can you? It's been like 7 minutes almost. History, starting in the pre-sound film era. Kind of experimental. A lot of this is experimental, but certainly back then. I'm going to say this. This isn't a history of the development of video as a thing. But I will say that if your notion is that music videos stretch back to MTV, no. You probably know there were videos before MTV. Do music videos stretch back to the 60s or even the 50s? Yes, they do. But believe it or not, that's not where they began. Did they begin in the 40s, 30s, 20s? No. In fact, the first video created for music was, drumroll, 1894. It's in the 19th century. Sheet music publishers Edward Marks and Joe Stern hired a guy named George Thomas and some artists to promote their song, The Little Lost Child, which, of course, back then, it was all sheet music, but there were, you know, very soon after, music charts and things like that, where the music sales were based on how many sheets you could sell. George Thomas used a magic lantern to project images on a wall while the song was playing. So those are visual images, video. It's an idea he had in 1892, actually, and it was made real in 1894. Played while a song was playing. So I think by anyone's standards or definition, this is it's a video set to music, or a video not just set to music, but created because of the music, that this was a proto-music video. Not only that, it worked. The song sold well over 1 million copies. So it was very effective, and that may actually go towards the conclusion of this podcast. This technology eventually caught on, and by the early 20th century, it was called the illustrated song, which, funny enough, this is something performers today do, which is what? Live music while a projector shows images. So there was something projecting, was an overhead projector or a magic lantern, or whatever you want to call it, projecting images while music was being played live. I've been in bands where we've brought a projector to a gig and played video or stills while the music was playing. And it was mostly video, but it was some stills. Of course, in this, it was almost all stills at this point because the technology hadn't developed. And so it's basically a slide show. And it was in dedicated theaters with projection booths. It was in, you know, live venues and things like that. But in those projection booth theaters, some moving pictures were used even in the early 20th century. So it already started back then. And they were so popular that at least 10,000 theaters nationwide featured them. And these music videos, these proto-music videos, these illustrated videos, illustrated song, I should say, even helped launch the careers of many silent film stars like Fanny Brice, Fatty Arbuckle, Eddie Cantor, George Jessel. If you know anything about that era, these were huge stars. So the more things change, right? Think of how many actors or directors these days got their start in music videos in the last 40 years, even. Quite a few, and some big names, David Fincher, Spike Jonze, things like that. Now, skip to 1924, and you have the technology advancing. Silent films are starting to become talkies. The first of these, not feature film, but the first talkie, they were in 1923, and they were all short films, which a lot of things start out shorter, and specifically, they were musical shorts. So the first talkies, or among the first talkies, films with sound, were musical shorts, and they included what we called lyric videos, which we know what they are today. Lyric videos were initiated by Fleischer Studios, who was also famous for cartoons. Follow the Bouncing Ball. If you've ever seen that in any cartoon, that's where this started. It was in other, at this time, not just in cartoons, but it kind of migrated to children's programming, cartoons and things like that. I saw a few in musicals of the of Hollywood era, 1950s and 60s, where there was a bouncing ball and words underneath but whatever. But that's something that's been around since the 1920s. And then, of course, famously, the first full-length sound film was Jazz Singer in 1927, starring Al Jolson, which was what? Also centered around music. So music played a huge part in video becoming successful. Others would follow. The music videos were eventually known as soundies, and from 1940 to 1946, they were produced and distributed to coin-operated machines in nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. They were also shown before feature films in theaters, and the bouncing ball videos were shown before feature films in theaters and things like that. But it's kind of cool to think that you could go into a place and drop a coin into a machine and watch a video, which, if that reminds you of anything, there were things, and I think I'll talk about it later, I believe. I don't remember my own notes. The Nickelodeon, which that channel is named after the theaters, and Odeon meaning theater and nickel meaning nickel, because you put a nickel in a machine to see a show, to see a movie, right? Also, these were significant in the 40s and prior to that, because these short music films gave artists of color an outlet they didn't otherwise have, because they weren't the thing that was making early Hollywood or any of those companies a ton of money. As usual, before money enters the picture, things can be extremely diverse. And then money enters the picture, and it gets controlled and homogenized, and then eventually, usually there's a protest and things widen again. But at this point, it was, a great outlet for people who wouldn't otherwise have an outlet. And the main reason these soundies died out in the 40s was TV. Think of how for decades we could only see movies in theaters, right? And then when VHS and Laserdisc and DVD and all that stuff came along, it meant that, theater business would start to diminish, and it's diminished, of course, greatly lately, even though it's still, a different experience. People would have to go to venues to see these soundies, these little music videos, put the coin in the machine, etc. And then as TV very rapidly spread, which I talked about when I talked about the TV theme songs in that episode, they could just view all that at home. So they were broadcast, and eventually places like that died out, and the soundies themselves died out. So for most of the 1950s, music with film attached, with a video attached, was either on TV or at the movies as shorts before a film, or in the films themselves. Then in 1958, again, as technology became more accessible, artists began making more promotional videos for their songs. Serge Gainsbourg is said to have been one of the first, as well as Tony Bennett, and possibly, most importantly, the Big Bopper, who died in that plane crash, who, as far as we know, as far as I could see, with the research I've done, again, patreon.com/music is not a genre if you'd like even deeper research. Big Bopper coined the term music video. The first time it was ever used in any public or significant way was by the Big Bopper, who was famous for the song Chantilly Lace. And the video for that had scenes of the Bopper on a phone call with a woman, so kind of a proto-plot. And he had plans, listen to this, to do entire albums with video. So video albums, which is something that is getting huger and huger today. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. It's been around a lot longer than that. But this is an idea he had, which you wonder if it had taken off, if he had continued to be famous and alive, most importantly, would he have had the resources to do full albums of videos? It's kind of intriguing. As these became more popular, these promotional videos that people like Tony Bennett, Serge Gainsbourg, Big Bopper had done, Europe began distributing, once again, machines. These were called Scopatone machines. Similar to the soundy machines of the 40s, they eventually spread to cocktail lounges and adult establishments throughout from the late 50s to the mid-1960s. There's the first mention of how porn and music cross over here when it comes to the dissemination of a technology like video. And we'll get to more of that as we go later on in the history here. Which brings us to the 1960s. And so if you've been following along, we had that proto video in 1894, which was conceived in 1892. We had the videos that continued on through the early 1900s. And then when soundies and shorts came along in the early 1920s, and they started to spread, the illustrated music video. Illustrated song. That was what they were called. That was a thing which then migrated to not just theaters, but to the machines, which then died out. And then you had artists starting it up again. The technology was cheaper and more widespread. And so someone had the idea of doing the Scopatone. That's really when, in a lot of ways, the modern era of thinking about music videos started. Because prior to that, it was a niche thing or only in certain places. It was kind of stop-start. It wasn't necessarily thought of as its own genre of art, let's say. And really, even in the 1960s, it wasn't either, except that people started to treat it more like art. Now, I guarantee you in the early 1900s and after that, people were treating those as art as well. But in a different way, and the technology was so different that it's hard to really make the case that that's, the start of all of this. But in the 1960s, you had artists like the Beatles who didn't, invent the promotional video or the music video as we know it today, but popularized it and legitimized it like never before. An artist who predated the Beatles, who did it and who followed the Beatles. So in the 60s, you started to see more and more promotional videos, partly because TV had more and more shows that featured music or that were centered entirely around music. And sometimes artists could not make it to those shows, so they would send a promotional video instead. So yeah, it's such a big turning point in the history of music videos. That would be 1964. The very first music series on television, Top of the Pops, debuted in Britain that year. Yeah, there was music before then. You had, what's his name, Ed Sullivan and all the variety shows and all of that. And, of course, Steve Allen and the early Tonight Show and all the talk shows. You had music, but you never had a show that was dedicated just 100% strictly to music and not to, okay, and now we have a juggler or a comedian or a ventriloquist or something else. For Top of the Pops, most artists perform live. As I said, some of them had schedules that were too busy. They couldn't make the taping. They would send the promotional video. The Beatles were right at the forefront of this. Their first movie, A Hard Day's Night, within it featured several music video-like sequences, as did Help, the movie, and all of their subsequent films featured sequences that were essentially self-contained music videos. They eventually created a strong handful of promotional videos that stood alone from those films, most especially, and I always remember these for the double single or whatever you want to call it, Paperback Writer and Rain. Awesome videos and pushed the form into more artistic territory. Others did the same around that time or a couple of years later. The Monkees had some pretty interesting videos. And I mean, their whole thing was video because it was a TV show, but then they would do, again, self-contained music videos. Roy Orbison did it. Bee Gees did it. Never discount the Bee Gees. In fact, the Moody Blues' early hit, it was a minor hit, Go Now, in 1964, had a video accompanied with it that was visually striking and predated the Beatles' first video. So the Moody Blues, in a certain way, not discounting the Big Bopper and all that, but in the rock era, were kind of the first band to do that. These films began to include actual plots and or kind of markedly stray from just performance-style videos, especially with bands like the Kinks and the Who and the Stones. Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues is a famous one. It's very impressionistic, so it's not just about watching the band perform. They're doing weird or interesting things. There may have been a plot or the hint of a plot. This kind of promotional video development would continue through the 60s. It would continue through the 70s. Though there weren't that many artists making them because it would cost money to make them. They did grow very slowly, including artists from non-mainstream rock genres like country and pop and glam. They also did these proto-music videos. Bowie is famous for doing them. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody in mid-70s is often considered the first modern era music video. And I'll say this, I think that may be true only in the sense that I believe that they set out intentionally to make something that could live on its own. In other words, if you don't buy the album, you can still watch this video and you're going to get even more from it because the video is providing these visuals that are awesome and different even than what the music was telling you, which I think is what really it really makes the difference between a video being necessary or unnecessary. Is it adding more information? Is it shedding new light on the song? Then to me, there's a certain element of, I won't say necessity because I believe a song should be able to stand on its own with its meaning, but an element of enhancement that goes beyond just the thrill of watching, I don't know, a band perform or a fun car chase or somebody on the hood of a car, whatever it was, when these things became super popular. So in a way, you could say Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody was the first modern era, although I will also say that those other bands I mentioned in the 60s were intentionally doing artistic videos, so I kind of think that it goes beyond, well before Queen. Which, by the way, since we're in the 70s, quick nod to Schoolhouse Rock, which in its first run from 1973 to 1985, not only left a huge mark on every kid who grew up with it, including me. I still remember, if I wanted to take the time out now, maybe that should have been the bonus episode, I could sing the entire Schoolhouse Rock version of the U.S. Constitution's preamble. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. I know the whole thing by heart. I haven't heard it in decades. That's the mark it left on me. And of course, 3 is a magic number and all of the other ones. If you know anything about Schoolhouse Rock, I will recommend, as I did in another episode, the 90s covers album of Schoolhouse Rock called Schoolhouse Rock Rocks. There were 65 Schoolhouse Rock music videos in all. And to think that here you are, a child growing up watching these self-contained stories, educational or not, or just fun, usually meant to be somehow educational, Mr. Morton and all that stuff. That was, what an impression it would make. It's no wonder music videos exploded shortly after that. But we're still in the 70s, and there's a reason for that, because in 1974 in Australia, something huge happened. Huge, huge, huge. That's not echo. I just repeated the word. Two 2 shows in the same year, Countdown and Sound Unlimited, also known as Sounds Unlimited and Sounds, debuted that year in 74, featuring, listen to this, see if this rings a bell, music news, interviews, music hosts, guest music hosts who were musicians, live performances, and a heavy, heavy element of music videos. If it reminds anybody of any cable channel, then raise your hand right now. I won't pause because I can't see you. Both of those shows were hugely influential. In fact, both lasted for about 13 years, till 87. Many artists' careers were helped by the videos, the music videos shown on these shows, including a lot of late 70s and early 80s new wave acts like Duran Duran, The Cure, The Cars, Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson, and so many more. These were very important shows in Australia. And the U.S. sort of picked up on this a few years later in 1978 when the USA Network, which I didn't know had been around since the 70s, and Showtime, which I did know had been around since at least the 70s, launched Video Concert Hall, a program offering several hours of music videos every day. Right after that, other weekly U.S. programs featuring videos as part of their shows popped up, like the Midnight Special, Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. I only know that name because Paul Schaefer parodied Don Kirshner on SNL. I honestly don't know much else about the guy. I guess a music entrepreneur, auteur, producer, whatever. And videos would pop up on other variety and talk shows in the late 70s. And it's notable that although Soundies and Scopatone, those machines, the self-contained, helped to promote artists of color because they, again, were technology that wasn't quite that disseminated yet, so they're being used by a lot of people. The artists of color were actually more absent from the music video circuit throughout the, like, say, mid-60s to the early mid-1980s, when finally Prince and Michael Jackson and the outcry there of MTV not having enough music from artists of color changed that and broadened the range. And because we are at this turning point in the late 70s, getting up to the early 80s, and you kind of know what's coming, I think this is a perfect time to take a break. So hang out, listen to or watch the mid-roll. Please go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Donate $1 single. Please just donate $1 single. And I'm going to take a break, and I will see you or talk to you in just a couple of minutes. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdimatteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdimatteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdimatteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers for my band REC, and beyond, it's at nickdimatteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdimatteo.com/contact or just hit the contact is on every single page. You can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month. And if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdimatteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. And so crossfade, and we are back. That was kind of crossfade backwards and then forwards. We are back with the second half of Music Videos, Do They Matter? And we are at 1981. Artistry, videos as art, things that started to happen long before were really starting to blow up. The megalith, MTV, started in 1981. with the first video, as many of you know, being the Buggles video Killed the Radio Star, which I found out, and I've known that's the first video for decades. I found out that the only place you could see the very first video in several videos, and I'm not even sure how many days or weeks, on MTV was New Jersey. In the entire world, the only place you could watch MTV when it started was New Jersey. Now, that's ironic because I was born in Philly, but I grew up in New Jersey. I lived there for about 30 years. And I did not see that very first video because, as I said, my parents didn't have cable. So here I am, one of the very few people in the entire universe who could have seen the very first video on MTV, and I didn't. So MTV was essentially like a video version of rock radio for its first few years, the VJs instead of DJs, but it was primarily rock music, as if you know anything about MTV history, you know, in those first few years, which became a problem. It made music videos popular, profitable, ubiquitous, and cool, at least for a while, for a short time, for some people and for some videos. As mentioned, I'm not going to go deep into MTV history, but there are a few points that I think are important. Like the Beatles, it didn't innovate. You know, the Beatles innovated certain things, but the things that they are often most known for, they took from other artists and fleshed out and made into the amazing versions that they did and popularized it, capitalized it, and codified it. And that's what MTV did with music videos and music programming, actually. Although, of course, heavy nod to the two Australian shows and the couple shows that came before that helped to start to shape what MTV would become. It gave artists and producers and directors a platform to show these videos and the music, and a reason to further develop the music video as a distinct art form to a wide audience. Why? Sort of competition, sort of the larger the pool, the more interesting you need to be. So it's not just about slapping up a few images on there, which is how everything develops. Eventually, you have to find more interesting ways to make what you're making. Of course, its other legacy in the first few years, as I have alluded to, was its segregation. Black artists were periodically featured from the very beginning, but they were largely from the rock world, such as Joan Armatrading. They were huge and mostly non-controversial pop stars, such as Tina Turner and Donna Summer, later on Michael Jackson and Prince, or as parts of integrated bands, such as Culture Club, Thompson Twins, The Specials, who were multicultural integrated bands. And like I said, though I didn't have MTV, I did see it at friends' places and even went to kind of a Thriller party. When Thriller debuted, I saw the entire thing live, its debut at a rich dude's house, who the guy actually just recently died a year or two ago. Big projection screen, one of those ones that had the 3 lights, I think red, green, and blue, and would merge together and project the image. And it was kind of, you know, amazing. And these days it looks really washed out, but it was a pretty big screen. But eventually, once Michael Jackson and then Prince broke the color barrier, like Little Red Corvette and all that, MTV finally opened its door to artists of color. It still took a while. It took really several years before things became integrated enough, which in a way, this is sort of a fairy tale. It's like a morality story, because you have this thing that is meant to be catering to young people, music video, and it's a brand new thing, and it's rock and roll and all of that, and it's so narrowly focused and doesn't realize it. And then it starts to realize it and can't figure out how to open up, and then it fits and starts, and it does. Until 20 years later, in the early 2000s, MTV was, by a show of a study that was done, it was the most diverse channel on TV. And that was largely because of its non-music programming, but also some of its music programming, which to me says that learning takes time, but it's worth it. I don't know anyone who would have necessarily a right to say the MTV of the 90s or 2000s, you know, sucked in that way that it did in the early 80s. You could say it sucked in the early 80s for the reasons we're talking about, but you have to give it credit for learning how to grow. Now, listen, if it learned how to grow because it was trying to capture more of a market share, honestly, so what? Because whatever reason it takes for entities and people to grow beyond focusing only on, let's say, white people or men or anything like that, or straight people, it's okay, because eventually it becomes the norm, and then there become other reasons why that company continues to do it. It's not just about the profit. MTV inspired other channels and shows. And you'll hear some of these here. HBO's Video Jukebox came on in 1981, just after MTV. In 1983, you had CMT, Country Music Television. Same year, you had TBS Night Tracks, which deliberately aired music videos from black artists who were ignored by MTV. So kind of cool that it made that its mission. 1983, big year for me. NBC's Friday Night Videos started. This was the first time I had access to a regular video show. And not to say anything about my social life, but I would also often stay home on Friday nights deliberately to be able to watch Friday night videos. I have a memory of being in my bedroom with that little TV on the dresser, watching Friday night videos and seeing, for whatever reason, Yes's Owner of a Lonely Heart. I don't know why that one sticks in my head. It does. Friday night videos lasted for about 20 years, actually, although I stopped watching it in the probably mid-late 80s. I don't know. 1984, ABC Rocks, which it didn't because it only lasted a year. That same year, Ted Turner's cable music channel did not do well. It was a broader cross-section than what was on MTV. And we're talking the mid-'80s by now, and there were still channels that were like, MTV, you're not doing it right, so let's do it this way. It didn't do well. Poor Ted Turner's cable music TV channel, whatever, but not poor, because the following year, that channel was sold to MTV, who redeveloped it into a little channel called VH1. So, you know, and VH1 had its own flavor, and it was kind of cool at that point to be like, oh, am I going to watch QVC or Home Shopping Network? Am I going to watch MTV or VH1? Am I going to drink Coke or Pepsi? Whatever it was. It was always that kind of dichotomy. Depeche Mode or New Order? Come on. Can't be both. Other copycat shows would pop up on tons of channels, each with a slightly different focus. So it was just everywhere at this point. New channels would continue to pop up, either as offshoots of existing channels, MTV specialty channels, MTV 1, 2, whatever, or other countries, MTV, Europe or Italy or whatever else it was, a VH1 Italy, etc. Or all new channels would also pop up during this period. And of course, channels originating from and focusing on other countries and languages, which I'm not even going to mention here. Almost every country that had television networks had some version of a video show by this point. These include 1994's Much Music USA, which in 2003 became Fuse, which I watched in the 2000s, stumbled on it, and was like, wait a second, there's a channel out there that's still just playing music videos? I thought that had been dead by then, and I saw a Sunny Day Real Estate video. Again, I don't know why I specifically remember that one, but I do, which would have been in like 04, 05, I think, when I saw that. And when it was rebranded as Fuse, it was meant to be a reaction to, again, MTV, because at that point, it wasn't really playing music. Music only... it only lasted until 2015, Fuse, which is quite late, considering what happened in the interim with, YouTube, and we'll talk about that. Music videos became a separate way for people to buy music. In fact, in the 1980s, charts were started for sales just of music videos. And compared to other formats like cassettes, CDs, and digital, their sales hovered around 2 to 5% of market share from the late 1980s to the early 2010s. But through that entire period, or actually, from the late 1980s through the early 2010s, 2 to 5% of the market share was outselling vinyl. Vinyl was less than that for that entire stretch. 1985 notable Dire Straits' Money for Nothing video was one of the first computer animated videos, and following year, Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, which is extremely well known, again, burgeoning computer animation. Artistic and technical strides were being made all over the place, and videos became very expensive to produce. And that would start to change a little bit in the following decade, but not right away, even the decade after that. 1988 is when Yo MTV Raps debuted, which was helpful as a major course correction for that channel and to expose people outside of that culture to hip-hop, which by then I had known hip-hop for almost a decade, and I, again, didn't have MTV, but I think for people who watched it, who were like, I don't really know this music that well, was probably super important. But there will continue to be a push-pull between progressivism, social and political and racial and gender, and censorship of all kinds. The Parents Music Resource Center and Tipper Gore and all that crap, and somebody that, you know, Frank Zappa fought against. Very well known in the late 80s. As videos settled into being normal and a normal part of the culture in the late 80s and early 90s, they kind of started to get stale. At least, you know, the ones that were well known in mainstream pop and rock and that were showed, you know, on MTV in the kind of main genres. Other genres would be doing new things such as hip hop and metal and eventually grunge, but the form on the whole kind of needed a refresher, which is one reason why you started to see videos repurposed, such as in the show Beavis and Butthead. Their initial run from 93 to 97, which, by the way, their second new season last year was actually really good, took off from 1988's Mystery Science Theater 3000, where it was showing actual clips of music videos while Beavis and Butthead were commenting on the videos, which is a well-known thing if you haven't seen that show. Shortly after that, VH1's pop-up video became the highest rated show on that channel in the late 90s, and it would be pop-up bubbles with comments and trivia as the video ran. It was a hugely popular thing. I remember actually enjoying it myself. But the other thing that changed when the music videos became kind of rote was that auteurs entered the picture. Young directors looking to experiment in a short form before possibly moving on to bigger things, such as the aforementioned David Fincher, Spike Jonze, who did Sabotage for the Beastie Boys and Buddy Holly for Weezer. He did Praise You and Weapon of Choice for Fatboy Slim, among many, many others. Michel Gondry, Chris Cunningham, Floria Sigismondi, Hype Williams are other well-known auteur directors of music videos. And they continue to be out there doing, other newer ones continue to be out there doing great things. These kinds of high-concept videos would more or less rule from the 90s through the mid-2000s. Which I would include in that a video, the first music video I ever did, which was in '02 for a song called It's Almost Over from the Metro Grand Sessions, where I had the concept of I was every member of the band, and it was because there was a science experiment gone wrong and I was cloned, but each version of my clone had a different personality, which really just meant with me wearing different clothings and, you know, having a different attitude. And I don't know, that's out there, and I can, you know, it's actually on youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You can find It's Almost Over, Nick, I don't know, or I'll put the link maybe. And I think that counts as that sort of auteur type video where it's trying to do something beyond what the music was telling you. 2004 to present is the final era of music videos. Because why? Like MTV in '81, there was a huge sea change in '04 when YouTube debuted. It was not the first time that music videos were online. In fact, that started around 1997 when iFilm launched. There were short videos on iFilm in the late 90s, including music videos. And fun fact, Vimeo predates YouTube. It started the year before in '03. It didn't take off until a few years later, which is why we think of it as following YouTube. But it started before YouTube. It was high-definition videos, and it's still a big go-to, actually, for artists and fans. In fact, I have another job where I use Vimeo every week. By this time, in the mid-2000s, most music video shows had died out, and most music video channels were largely non-music programming, as is very well known with a channel like MTV. Also, by this time, internet speeds and upload capabilities made it easier for companies and even individual users to share and watch videos. So watch first of all, but then actually share videos that you may have seen or upload your own videos, which was not something that most people did in the 90s because it was too hard to do. It would take forever. I uploaded the aforementioned It's Almost Over video, which I had made a couple years before. I uploaded it as soon as YouTube launched, more or less, which means it kind of straddled that era between the 90s, early 2000s auteur videos and then the burgeoning YouTube share it online videos. And it is one of the higher, more watched videos on this channel that if you're watching, you are watching right now. Like with music, low and no budget ruled the day in the 2000s. Music video concepts were mostly scaled down in favor of homegrown artists' self-productions. Think of a band like OK Go and their song Here It Goes Again, that treadmill video from '06, which was hugely popular. You don't realize how early in YouTube's history it was. And a personal huge fave of mine, the following year, '07, Mute Math's video for Typical. I only discovered, well, not only, but it might have been 10 years ago. So it was long after it had come out. But man, that video, talk about conceptual. And it's such a great song anyway. Look up Mute Math Typical. Look up the video. The whole thing is shot in reverse in a way that blows your mind. And I know there are other videos out there like that and other people, you know, have faves. That's one of my faves. The homegrown aesthetic quickly spread to users. So it was artists and companies who were like, we can't spend this much money on videos. Let's scale it back and do fun conceptual stuff. And that spread to all the genres. But then users who, you know, technology again became easier, step by step it does, started to create and upload their own videos. First, usually as tributes to other artists, so they might do a montage or stills or clips of the artist as they played a favorite song of theirs and create a video of that. Like, oh, Duran, I love this Duran Duran song, and here's pictures of Simon Le Bon and the Taylors and all that stuff. But then increasingly, users would make their own music videos for their own original music, which you know is everywhere now. So you're like, yeah, duh. But in the mid-2000s, it was not everywhere. This is kind of when it started. And now let's talk about that fan video concept where a fan makes a video for a song they love, of an artist they love. The first known fan video was actually in 1975 when a woman made a slide carousel, an artist. She did a lot of these slide carousel of Star Trek stills set to a song and did it often. And that's when it started, supposedly. No one's been able to find a fan video prior to that. But if you know of one, let me know. And then, of course, every now and then probably one was made, and now they're everywhere. And they run the range of all hobbyist art. Some are barely watchable. You'd rather just listen to the song. And some are quite good and right up the middle there. And some are amazing, you know. Another well-known video channel, '09, Vivo debuted. And then with the rise of smartphones, right around that time, vertical videos became a thing for the first time ever and blew up with apps later on like Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, and here we are. Spotify Canvas videos are another kind of brief like promotional offshoot of that. I think they're 7 seconds or something like that. If you have ever clicked on the song on Spotify and watched that video go around and around. So that is a short promotional vertical video. And they can often be kind of interesting for as short as they are. Though lyric videos, of course, had been around since at least the first bouncing ball era, they rose to greater prominence in the 2010s hugely because they were easy for anyone to make. I actually put, a couple years ago, several of my old albums on Rec's YouTube channel, which is always linked in every episode. You can subscribe to Rec's YouTube channel. That I made those albums into each song into a lyric video, which was a lot of fun, and I will never do it again, but that was a lot of fun. Videos married to album releases. Well, this became more interesting a concept after I did last week's episode with Steve Erickson. Specifically on Tierra Whack, and you'll see why. Video albums have actually been around, again, longer than you think. Most things have, at least as early as the late 1970s. Blondie's album Eat to the Beat in 79 was co-released with a VHS with videos for every single song. I don't know what's on that album, but that's pretty cool. Artists would do this, again, sporadically through the years. Tina Turner was famous for doing one. In the 2000s, it became more common for artists to release full-on video albums because it was easier and because there was a place to put them where people could watch them. And it continues today. You know, most artists don't do it, I would say. They'll just pick a song and do a video or whatever. But you have artists like Bjork, who did something called Biophilia, which had visual elements to it that went beyond music video. It was interactive. And it was at the time thought of as, oh, is this where everything's going? You have these, you know, RPG games and people online, you know, being able to do what they want with things. And there were video games where you could manipulate stuff like that. And so musicians started to do it too, and other types of artists started to do it. It didn't really go anywhere. It lasted a couple of years. But for a few years, as it developed and was a little kind of on the quiet, you now have artists like the aforementioned Tierra Whack, for whom the visual album, which is a big thing. That first album that she released, or that 15-minute thing she released in 2018, where it was 15 one-minute songs, and was done primarily because you know, Instagram at the time had a limit of 1 minute, and she wanted all the songs on there. But even the current album that she released, Worldwide Whack, is very tied to the video element. And what I learned from last week's guest is that there are artists who, and I mentioned this a little earlier, who, this is where I'm conflicted. You listen to the song, you get a sense of it. But the lyrics don't convey everything, and neither does the music. Then you watch the video, and it adds this whole other layer, like a skin, on top of the song that sheds light on what the song meant in the first place. It even happened, we talked about Kim Gordon's new album, The Collective, and there's a video there where it shed some light on that. And I think that's cool in the sense of, if you want to tell an alternate story with the same song, but I don't necessarily like the idea that the only way to fully enjoy an art that is meant to be listened to is to also watch it, for a lot of reasons. I think it's a great addition. I think it's a great enhancement. And I think for artists, it's awesome, because if that's where you lean, then do it forever. And if you like it as a fan, that's great too. But again, music itself should be able to stand alone without any help. People who grew up on music and non-music video consumption prefer to have visuals while listening. And that, it's interesting to me, because when I was growing up, I kind of did prefer to have visuals, but my visuals were the album art and the lyrics. So I really was watching or looking at something as I was listening, because I did want more information, especially if I couldn't understand the lyrics. But to see the art and kind of get into the world of it was kind of cool. But again, those were enhancements where if you listen to the song 3, 4, 5 times, you would kind of get a very similar experience. So they weren't strictly necessary. But this is why YouTube is now one of the top sources for music in the entire world. It competes. It's up there with Spotify and Apple and the streaming services. Many, many people, millions of people, hundreds of millions, whatever it is, get their music strictly from YouTube and not anywhere else. And that's partly because it's free, unlike those other services. The first to top 1 billion on YouTube, 1 billion views, very famous in 2012, Psy, Gangnam Style. And it was I wouldn't even call it a slow boil. What is that? 8 years, and you get 1 billion views finally on YouTube. And even though more people get their music through streaming, YouTube single video stats are actually well above anything on Spotify. Here's a perfect example. Top song so far on Spotify right now in 2024 is The Weeknd's Blinding Lights, which has just over 4 billion streams. Whereas the top music video on YouTube, and laugh if you want, this is an actual song that has a video to it. It's called Baby Shark Dance. We all know it. As of March 2024, has more than 14 billion views. So more than 3 times the top song on Spotify. And again, if you don't consider that a music video, like it or not, if you don't, the second most streamed video on YouTube is Despacito, very well known, with over 8 billion. So again, more than twice the top song on Spotify. In fact, the top 30 and more viewed videos of any kind on YouTube are all music videos. And the top 14 of those all have more views than the top Spotify song, which is a perfect time to get to the conclusions. Because here's the question. Do they matter? I'm going to answer for me first, which the short answer is no. And that's because my number one focus is the music itself. I've always said serve the song. Well, the song serves the music serves the song. I should be able to convey everything I want to through that song. That's my job as a music creator. Music, first and foremost, is for listening. The video was once a novelty and then a promotion and then a work of art in its own right, and now a prime source for any music at all, and also still about promotion and art and all that other stuff is important. It's interesting. It's its own body of art. And there are so many worthy videos being made, including and often especially by homegrown artists. But I think my personal opinion is we do the music a disservice by emphasizing the video over sound. That if your only possible way to enjoy a song is to be watching something as well, then you are missing out on an experience by overstimulating your senses, in a sense, and distracting your brain from just focusing on the sound of it. And it caters to the necessity of social promotion. I've done videos, both live and produced, partly because putting something out there. It's one of the reasons why I do video versions of this podcast. And to me, it's almost an act of defiance these days to not release a video for every new single. I put a bunch of new singles out recently, no videos for those. It's partly defiance and partly time and partly money, but the point being, you don't have to have a video for everything. Although, if you're going to release it on streaming, YouTube will create a quote-unquote video with just the album art, which is totally fine. And I would prefer that it is on YouTube in one way or another. I think there's always going to be more to explore with any kind of art, and especially music videos. Just making a standard video, frankly, is still pretty cool, and it's still pretty worthy, no matter who does it. But I think that I often find videos that try to stretch, just like any art, they overburden themselves with meaning. They overburden themselves with the video itself. There's often, oh my God, long introductions before you get to the song, and it's not the uncut version. It's the official video for the song, has like 4 minutes of scenes, and then you get to the song. And I'm like, just tell me that you did that. And then release one where I can just get to the song. Because even though Thriller was a big thing and whatever, I've honestly never been a huge fan of that. That's just not my thing. I think that VR is where a lot of video is going to go, as well as, of course, CGI, AI, and all that stuff. But the total immersion in sound as an object, to be able to put glasses on and see the music, is something I'm probably more interested in than even an actual video at this point. I think that when music is used effectively in film, paradoxically, I love it. And there are times where, and that's because the primary focus there is on the characters and the story, and then the music is there to enhance it, which I think is kind of life. Because even though music is kind of my thing, life is more my thing, as it should be. And what music does is it enhances life. You know, and so music in film enhances the film. When the film is all about the music, I'm a little less interested, because then you're kind of, you know, hitting a hammer with a hammer, or whatever the frickin' saying is. But it's married to visuals of a story you're already invested in, as opposed to you're creating a story out of nothing and you got to get invested in it in a couple of minutes, and then you want to get to the song you want to get to. Not my thing. I would rank, for me, recorded music first. Live music, not recorded, just playing it, second. Live recorded music, jazz, classical, other music like that, for which the studio can't really capture the essence of it, as third. Music videos is fourth. Live videos like online shows and stuff like that is fifth. Live recorded music like rock shows and pop shows are at the bottom for me. They always have been. Again, there's room for growth. And that matters because YouTube and Instagram and TikTok are some of the top sources for music, as I know from my streaming stats as well. Despite my personal preference, which I just told you, both artists and fans are gravitating toward most music being connected to a visual of some sort. Not always visual albums like Tierra Wax and people like that, but there's a video somewhere for pretty much every song that is released. Most of those videos are not essential to understanding the music, which I think is the way it should be. But if they are, and that's an experience you like where you're merging like, oh, I have to put this puzzle together. And the only way to fully see the picture is to listen to the song and then listen to it by watching the video. And I'm like, oh, now I understand what the words are. And if that's your thing, then, you know, go for it. Which brings me to the last couple of sections here. My videos, I'm including the playlist on Rec's YouTube channel for all the videos that I have created. There's a dozen or more videos there. And then, of course, the lyric videos that I created are also on Rec's YouTube channel. Rec, R-E-C, that's my band, as you may know. And the featured song on this video version of this podcast is going to be a video that I made for a song called Final Call from Sympathy for the Weird. It's also on RECcollection, the Best of Rec 2007 to 2020. And it's one of my favorite videos. It's one of many I created for that project, The Weird Objective. And I think it really captures the mindset of the protagonist in the song Final Call because it's creepy and haunting. It's a guy trying hard to follow unwritten rules of living a good life and struggling to find a reason to stay in line and to also keep engaging with people or living at all. And that's, again, I think you get all that from the lyrics and from the music, but I also think I made a pretty cool video of that. It's impressionistic, which is my favorite kind of music video, impressionistic videos. It's almost like I often enjoy those screensaver videos more than I enjoy actual videos because then it's like a psychedelic experience where you're just taking a trip with these visuals. And I think actual videos that have more abstract concepts can serve the same purpose, which is kind of cool. So please check out that playlist. Please stick around for the video, or if you're just listening for the song, Final Call, and reminding you that the bonus episode, MxTRA video on patreon.com/musicisnotagenre is about pornography and technology. We're talking porn, people. You knew it was going to happen sooner or later. I mean, look at me, right? Look me in the face. And I'm saying this because it does tie into how music helped technology develop as well. My questions for you are you into music videos? What are some of your favorites? Do you prefer to consume music that way on YouTube or whatever, or would you rather just listen? How significant are videos to you at all? And how significant do you think they are in general? I'd like to know answers to all those because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you next week. I'll talk to you directly next week because it's a catch-up episode where I am talking to fans and you're talking to me through your comments. Take care.
Do I stand